Hello and welcome. I'm Kenzie.
And I'm Carly, and this is Ask a Therapist.
Each week, we explore life's most relatable questions, from relationships and boundaries to burnout and self-worth, all through a therapist's lens.
We're licensed therapists, but this isn't therapy. It's a place for insight, reflection, and a little humor along the way.
Your questions,
our insights.
Ask a Therapist. This podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. The content shared should not be considered a substitute for professional mental health care, diagnosis, or treatment. We strongly encourage listeners to seek help from a licensed mental health professional for any personal or psychological concerns.
Any advice or commentary offered is based solely on the information provided. As such, we cannot guarantee any specific outcomes, and the feedback given should not be interpreted as professional mental health advice. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please call 911, 988, or 211.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Ask a Therapist. This is our fourth season, episode 31. Carly and I are so excited to be back with you guys. It really feels like we are kind of getting the hang of this and getting into a good groove and routine. So I can't wait for the season. We already have such good questions that we're excited to talk about. This week, we have a letter from a listener who is struggling with a friend who is compulsively lying. So we want to just share a quick reminder for this episode and this season that while our questions are specific to listener submissions, the insight and responses we share are meant to be supportive and applicable to anyone who may be listening. We are excited to explore this with you all. So let's get started. Carly, we're back. We're at season 4. I'm so excited.
Yes, welcome back.
I know. And we're doing things a little bit different for the intro. We keep kind of like playing around with the intro and seeing what works and what sticks. So if you are listening to this and you feel like, oh, I like when you guys talk about, your lives, or I like when you talk about therapy things, just let us know. But we're going to start this season with some like therapist tips. So we're going to start our intro with just a little bit of like insight that we have as therapists that maybe could be helpful either to individuals listening to this or other therapists that are listening to this that you can use with your clients. And so our therapist tip of the week is something that, I think that we kind of like know and talk about, but this is something that I like really feel like is something that I resonate with and also use with clients. And it's that when you feel, so this one is around like anxiety. And it's that when you feel anxious, a lot of times your instinct is going to be like, okay, I want certainty around this thing. Like I feel anxious and so I want to know what's going to happen, or I want to be able to control this. Like uncertainty is such a strong part of anxiety. And so you want to have that certainty. But oftentimes certainty isn't what's going to relieve us from the anxiety because we can't guarantee anything that we don't know yet. And so oftentimes what does relieve us from the anxiety is knowing that we can handle uncertainty, knowing that we're going to be okay and that we have the tools to be able to navigate something that comes up. And so, being able to say to yourself, like, I have gotten through every difficult thing thus far before. I have this confidence in myself to be able to handle what I don't necessarily know yet, and kind of ground yourself and work on some of those like breathing tools, grounding tools to be able to say, like, I am feeling anxious right now because I don't know what's going to happen, but that's okay. I can handle that. And it actually, I can get more confidence and strength from knowing that I can handle the uncertainty than by trying to control or predict what's going to happen. So that's our first therapy tip of the week. Carly, I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on how difficult it is to deal with uncertainty. And of course, depending on what type of uncertainty we're talking about, the stakes can be, to varying degrees of intensity. And so, managing uncertainty, I think there's just a certain amount of acceptance with not knowing that we have to learn to live with. It may not make us comfortable, but when we accept that there are things that are outside of our control, there are things that maybe will happen in the future that we can't always predict. I really think, like you said, building up our skill set around resilience and the way we respond to things rather than react to things, like that's how you prepare for the unknown. You can't brace yourself for like the hit that you don't know is coming, but you can build up your strength to be able to like handle when you do maybe get hit with a curveball. So
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, good. Well, that's our tip of the week. And we will kind of see how, what else we come up with the rest of this season. But I think that we can kind of jump into our listener question.
Okay. At Carly King Therapy, you don't have to navigate life alone. I'm Carly King, a licensed marriage and family therapist helping individuals, couples, and families work through anxiety, depression, and relationship challenges with compassion and clarity. Using proven approaches like narrative therapy, emotionally focused therapy, and the Gottman method, I help you better understand your story, strengthen your connections, and create lasting, meaningful change. Whether you're facing a difficult transition, working to repair your relationship, or simply wanting to feel more like yourself again, support is closer than you think. With convenient virtual sessions, you can connect from wherever you are. I'm licensed in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Florida, and accept select insurances. Visit CarlyKingTherapy.com to schedule your free consultation. Carly King Therapy. Support that meets you where you are.
If you've been feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or stuck in unhealthy patterns, therapy can help. At Therapy with Kenzie, I offer virtual therapy for adults navigating anxiety, relationships, life transitions, self-esteem, and everyday stress. You don't have to figure everything out alone. Visit www.therapy-with-kenzie, that's KENZIE.com, to learn more and book your free consultation today.
Okay, let's jump into our question. This is a good one because I don't want to say it stumped me, but I really felt the dilemma of this question. Like I felt myself saying like this, but then also that. So I'm very interested to hear your take, Kenzie. It says, "Hi, ladies. I could really use your advice on this. I have a close friend who has a habit of lying, and it's gotten to the point where it's affecting our entire friend group. These aren't huge, life-altering lies, but they're frequent enough that people have started noticing. She'll tell conflicting stories, exaggerate details that don't need embellishing, or make claims that are pretty easy to disprove. Sometimes the lies seem completely unnecessary, which honestly makes it even harder to understand. The part I'm struggling with is that I don't think she's a bad person. I care about her a lot, and I don't think she's lying to be malicious. If anything, it feels like it's become a reflex. But I've also found myself in situations where someone asks me if what she said is true or looks to me to back up her story, and I don't want to damage my own credibility by defending something I know isn't accurate. I also don't want to embarrass her by calling her out in front of other people. Now the rest of our friend group is talking about doing some kind of intervention because they're tired of constantly wondering what's true. I understand where they're coming from, but I'm worried that if we all sit her down and tell her she's a liar, she'll feel attacked, get defensive, and shut down completely. That doesn't seem like it would help anyone. So my question is, how do you confront someone you genuinely care about when lying has become a habit? Is there a compassionate way to bring it up that encourages more honesty instead of making them feel cornered? Should this be a one-on-one conversation instead of a group intervention? And where do you draw the line between being supportive and enabling behavior that's starting to affect everyone around them? I'd love to hear how you would handle this. Kenzie, what do you think?
I think that this is such a great question. I am excited to dig into it. I think that first initial reactions are, this listener sounds like a wonderful friend. I love the compassion that's in this question. I love that they're saying, I don't think that they're doing it maliciously. I don't think that they're a bad person. I care about them a lot. And it seems like it's more of a reflex. I think that's pretty intuitive. And, I definitely can tell how much they care about their friend. I also totally get that, Carly, I don't know if you have been around people that compulsively lie before, but it's annoying. It's frustrating. It's like what? Why are you this isn't something you need to lie about. And so there can be some definite frustration that comes up. And later on in this episode, I'd love to get into some of the reasons that people do compulsively lie, like what might be the reason behind it. But I think that there's a couple different parts to this question. And something that I also want to make sure that we touch on is like the role that this listener is playing. If people are asking them kind of like, did this really happen? And them potentially maybe protecting their friend a little bit too much because it puts them in a position of having to then like lie because they don't want to embarrass their friend. And I think that it's a tricky situation to be a part of, but I do think that we hopefully will be able to help this listener navigate it a little bit more. Carly, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, my initial thought was this listener is writing this letter with a lot of empathy and compassion. So I also wanted to highlight that. Like, there's nothing that I'm reading that sounds, even the frustration that you're describing that can naturally come with a habit like that. I'm not hearing a whole lot of like blame or shaming of the friend. It sounds like this person really does want to be helpful, and that's why they're trying to be intentional about how to approach it. Like, in just recognizing that, yeah, if you call someone out and you're somewhat accusatory, there's just a better chance that they're either going to lie like they typically do, or that they're going to shut down, right? And then like the whole goal kind of gets lost in that if it was really about helping the friend. So I think their instincts to say like, okay, I kind of want to do something about this, but I am not sure how. I think those were just really, really good instincts. So that's the first thing that stood out to me. And I agree with you. There's a few different questions that are asked in here about like how to be compassionate and confront, but then also like, and whether it should be a one-on-one versus a group effort, but then also like, what about my credibility in all of this? You know what I mean? So I would like to touch on all of those things as well. And I also took the route. This might be just the curiosity in me as a therapist. But my first question when someone is compulsively lying is why? What purpose is it serving? What need is it meeting? Now, this is not, I just want to be clear, it's not the listener's responsibility to seek this out per se, or, it's not like they have to go on a mission to be able to answer this for their friend. But I do think the reason that a person is lying can dictate how you approach confronting it, right? So like, just for an example, if someone is lying to like avoid consequences or avoid conflict in some way, I do think the way that you approach that might be a little bit different than if someone is lying, maybe to be manipulative or to take advantage of someone, right? So while the why it is not an excuse for what's happening, I do think it can help you to tailor your approach in a way that can be that can more directly address what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think provides some maybe some clarity, some more understanding, maybe even some empathy of kind of like, if you are feeling frustrated or you are kind of like, I don't understand why they're doing this, it can help you to have a little bit more context. And I'd love to give the top reasons that somebody might compulsively lie. And this is something that we, have seen or maybe people have even just experienced in their own lives with people that they know. Or if you're somebody that does struggle with compulsively lying, like a lot of times it's rooted that the top reasons that this happens is because the person is either experiencing low self-esteem or insecurity. They had a childhood where honesty wasn't safe. This is something that comes up a lot. Like they might have been taught that like they might have gotten in trouble a lot, or they, if they had done something, like they might have been scared to tell the truth. And so their instinct and their protection might have come from lying, and that is carried on into adulthood, even if it's not serving them anymore. They may have a strong need for approval or belonging. They may have a difficulty tolerating shame, which can, a lie can protect them from feeling embarrassed, inadequate, or judged. Or they may have a desire for excitement or attention. So those are some of the biggest reasons that somebody might compulsively lie. And again, to your point, Carly, it's not this listener's job to like identify that necessarily, but it might give some understanding into how it happens or why it happens. And a lot of times I would say that lying is rooted in like shame and fear. And so this listener, like, one, they might not necessarily like recognize that they're doing it a ton, but they also might not feel good about it. Like they might not feel like this is something that they're like, I don't know if proud of is the right word, but it might be something that's like shameful for them that they do. And so thinking about doing the group intervention, my instincts lean towards the same way that this listener's does, of kind of like, I could see how this could trigger a lot for them, especially if they have feelings of shame, or if they feel like they're not enough, or if they feel like they don't belong. Having a group of people coming at them and being like, you do this, I think would spark that initial jump reaction that they already have of trying to like lie their way out of it, versus if it was a one-on-one or a little bit more of like a contained understanding and empathic environment where maybe this listener or somebody that this friend is very close to went to them one-on-one and was just kind of said like, listen, this is something that I've noticed and I don't want to accuse you. I don't want to make you feel embarrassed, but it is something that is impacting our friendship. And so I want to bring it up and talk to you about it, because I don't know if you know that you're doing it. I don't know if you're intending to do it, but it is something that I have noticed in these certain situations or in these certain circumstances.
Yeah, I'm going to back up because I like that you gave the reasons for compulsive lying. And
Sure.
I'm even going to back up further just to destigmatize the lying just a tad. Again, this is not an excuse,
Yeah.
but the reality is that most people do lie. Like lying is not like it's not an uncommon habit for people to have and in certain situations, but compulsively lying is a little bit different, right? So most people lie as a coping strategy, it can be, like you mentioned, a fear of rejection, a fear of being judged. It can be not feeling like you're interesting enough. It could be not worrying that you're not going to be accepted. There's a lot of different, you're trying to avoid disappointing someone or letting someone down. Or sometimes people lie to like hide or protect themselves, like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Like how many times have you lied saying that you're fine when you're not fine, right? So I only share that to say, like, we do need to put this into context. Most people can relate to lying and why it's done. And it does typically start as a coping strategy. But to your point, once it becomes compulsive, that's usually a sign that something has gotten mixed up in some way. It can be a sign of trauma, like you were mentioning, where, telling the truth was unsafe in some way. And so now maybe even subconsciously, there's just like a default almost to self-protect where they don't even think about it that much. Lying can also, though, compulsive lying can also be associated with some personality disorders. So compulsive lying in and of itself is not like a mental health disorder, at least not one that we have in the DSM-5 right now, but it is one of the symptoms like listed under a number of personality disorders. And I want to acknowledge that too, because everybody that lies obviously does not have a personality disorder, but there can also be forms of lying that are manipulative intentionally, like that is a thing. So what I'm hearing the listener say is that they really don't think it's on the malicious side, but just to kind of give the range, the reasons can be very varied and the intention behind it can also be somewhat varied or on a spectrum there. And so when I'm listening to the types of lies that this listener is describing that the friend tells, it doesn't sound like they're like avoiding consequences or even conflict of some sort. It doesn't even necessarily sound like self-protection. It more so sounds like wanting to control the narrative around who they are or what they're about or the things that they do. It sounds like maybe things to be more interesting or to seem to be more accepted by people. And so, that to me doesn't necessarily sound malicious. It sounds like it could be a little manipulative, but it sounds, to your point, like it potentially comes from a place of just maybe lower self-esteem or not being really confident in who they truly are. And so it feels better and maybe safer to present an image that they think people will be more interested in. And so that's like what this sounds like to me. So considering that, I think you're spot on with the group approach is probably going to have the opposite effect, because if they are lying to be accepted and they learn that a whole group of people is like onto them and is now calling them out, that is going to be perceived as a direct threat to this whole wall that they've been building up. That doesn't mean it's wrong for you all to want to talk to your friend, but I just don't think it's going to have the effect of, oh, you guys are so right. That is probably somewhat unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can imagine just the shame and embarrassment that would come in a situation like that. Do you think that there's any, because group interventions can be really good in certain circumstances. I mean, do you think that there is any situation where having a group kind of having a group intervention for somebody who's lying is appropriate, or is there any way that they could go about it that would make sense? I don't know if sense is the right word, but I'm sure that most of the friend group is coming from a good place, but how can they all kind of get their need met of wanting to reach out to this person or wanting to help this person in a way without making this friend feel even worse about themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess I can think of some scenarios where the group helps. I know people will sometimes do group interventions for substance abuse and trying to sit people down and, you really need to, consider making a change here. And I do think there's something to knowing that multiple people care about you and want to support you. I think that can feel very comforting.
Okay.
But the confrontation piece of it, I think clearly there's some conversations that are happening away from this friend that they're even, discussing doing this group intervention. And so I guess I'm just imagining if there's one person who's maybe closest to this friend, maybe that's the listener, maybe that's someone else in the group, could a part of that conversation be who do you think she'd be most open to hearing from, or who has has built or established the most trust with her, because maybe that's the person that kind of takes the hit and decides to have the conversation. And then the friends can offer support in other ways, you know what I mean? But maybe just not in the form of the intervention. And so when I say other ways, if part of what's discovered is that they don't feel all that interesting or accepted, maybe that's just being mindful of the things that you say and do that could feel like judgment or could push the person away or make them feel you're not interested in talking to people who don't, I don't know certain things or haven't experienced certain things. So that's a way that they can be mindful of how they're impacting the friend, but without joining in an intervention,
Yeah, I love that. And I think that it would make sense, right, for this listener who, whoever else that is maybe kind of trying, I think just for clarity's sake, I think for this listener to reach out to that group and just kind of say, hey, here are my thoughts. And here's why I think that maybe this isn't the best approach, but here's what I think could be helpful. I will reach out to her one-on-one, or, whoever is closest, who would it make most sense to reach out one-to-one? And then the rest of us can kind of have a better understanding, be supportive. I love your idea of how can we support in a way that doesn't make this listener feel ganged up. And I actually don't know that it would be a good idea to be we've all been talking about it and we all want to support you. I think you leave it as they've got one person that kind of goes in and talks to this person and says, listen, I've been noticing this. I love you. I care about you. This is how it's impacting our friendship, or here's what I'm noticing, and kind of want to address this. And then I think that the rest of the group kind of just has to trust that okay, somebody's brought it up, and maybe you can gently call it out if it's happening. But I wouldn't kind of go in with this idea of now we're all going to gang up on her, or, be aggressively holding her accountable, and or let her know that we've all been talking about her. I think that would be difficult for anybody. And so just kind of keeping that in mind too.
No, I agree there. And I wonder if we could talk about some of the language if either the listener or another friend were to approach this friend, how to approach it. And so, I'm thinking about kind of some of the suggestions that you started with in terms of like really wanting that empathy to shine through more so than the judgment. I think in this situation, calling the lies out directly are probably going to create a confrontation that if this friend is not ready for, she's going to have a reaction to.
Sure.
And so I think pointing out not just observations, but how you've been impacted by it is the way to go. And this goes back to like, things I've probably mentioned before, like using I statements, sticking to your own feelings, thoughts, beliefs, as opposed to making accusations. Like, I know you always lie. That is probably going to like elicit a defensive response as opposed to, I've noticed some areas where your stories maybe don't align. And, I'm curious around that. There's that therapy talk, but like, I'm curious around what might be happening or, I've been put in some uncomfortable positions before and I really want to be supportive of you, but I'm not always sure how to do that, So like sticking to your own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and compassionately showing them what you're seeing and then making it clear that your intention behind it is to preserve the friendship. Your intention behind it is out of care for them and you all's friendship or their friendships with other people. And so I think if you approach it in that way, you're more likely to get the friend to put their defenses down a little bit than if you're like, listen, I know A, B, and C weren't true. So like, what the hell,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, keeping in mind that like if this is a fear-based response or feeling like not enough, that language of challenging, like aggressively challenging is absolutely going to put their defenses up. Like they might not know how to be authentically themselves. They might not know how to be vulnerable in that way. And lying might be their coping for that. And so bringing the defenses down, having that empathy is such an important part of this conversation because you're not going to get anywhere without it. And I think that, just to follow up on some of your advice, Carly, I think that something else, the I statements for sure, kind of being like, hey, like, I was put in a position, I was put in a position back there where like, I saw things differently. Like, I know that you said this, but like, I don't think that that's necessarily what happened. And it was tough for me to kind of like say that, like, what happened? Like, what happened or what came up for you? Or even if you do notice certain patterns, like if this friend lies more around a group of people more so than others, even kind of gently calling that out and saying like, I've noticed that this happens a little bit more with these people. I'm wondering if there's something about being in that group that maybe is a little bit more difficult or, some language around that. But I do think that it is important to definitely tie in like, I don't want to make you feel embarrassed or bad. Like, I want to talk to you about this because I care about you, because I care about our friendship. And I don't want to be put in a position anymore where I'm having to like question or defend or, or have it impact our friendship and our relationship. Like, and again, just kind of understanding and knowing where some of this lying might be coming from, that it's not from, hopefully not from like a malicious place, but more from one that's a little bit more rooted in like shame or low self-esteem or something like that, can help you have that empathy and be a little bit more understanding.
Yeah. I like the idea of even sticking to like, sometimes I have a hard time knowing what's true or, sometimes I have a difficult time knowing how to support you as a friend, right? Or sometimes I have a hard time with trust. I have a hard time trusting the things that you're saying because of these discrepancies, but I want to bring them to you as opposed to just carrying my doubt in the darkness, kind of. So it's at least being presented in a way that's inviting for the person to put that veil down just a little bit and consider engaging honestly. Of course, the friend still has a choice in how they respond. They can, completely deny everything that is brought to their attention. But at least in that situation, you kind of did your part in terms of addressing it, being honest about how you feel. And then maybe you have a decision to make about what position in your life this person is going to hold based on like their response, but at least you've opened the door. And if the person is ready to address it or talk through it, or even just sees it differently, like, oh, I didn't really see it as that big of a deal. But yeah, you're right. That's not exactly how it happened. I just thought it was a funny story. Or, you don't know how the person might, maybe they just don't see it as quite that big of a deal,
Sure.
So I think their response will then kind of dictate what options you have moving forward. But I think the approach is what is it? It's either going to open the door at the beginning or it's going to slam it shut to begin with.
Yep. Yep. The last thing that I wanted to touch on was just where do you draw the line between being supportive and enabling behavior that's starting to affect everyone around them? And my mind goes back to the part of the question where they're like, I get put in an uncomfortable position where it's either like, do I say, yes, this happened, or do I embarrass them and say, no, this didn't happen? And I do think that it's important that, it's not going against your friend. Like you have to be true and honest yourself, right? And so I think that having this conversation with your friend opens up that door. And also you can make this a part of the conversation to kind of say like, if somebody asks about this or, this happens again, like I want to make sure that I'm being honest with my interpretation of how things go. And I do think that it is important that you are honest with people. So if people are like, is that how it really happened? You don't have to be rude. You don't have to make your friend feel uncomfortable or embarrassed, but you can just kind of say like, oh, I saw it a little bit differently. Like this is how it happened, or this is how I saw it, or this is what I experienced. And it can be a little bit more straightforward, matter of fact. Again, you don't have to call too much attention to the friend that might be feeling embarrassed or some shame around it. But I think it's also potentially a good, like, let me see that, like, oh, I did it again for your friend that might have a habit of this, or it might be a little bit hard for them to break, again, in an environment that they know that you do love and care about them, but you're not kind of compromising yourself and feeling caught up in their lies.
I agree wholeheartedly. I don't think that you should have to sacrifice your own credibility or reputation or your values for that matter, because that's kind of what we're talking about is if honesty is a value that this listener holds, that's important to them, they shouldn't have to compromise that in order to be a friend to this person, right? And so that's a good place to put up a boundary and just kind of say, maybe that boundary is, okay, I'm not going to expose my friend, but I'm also not going to lie for them, right? And finding that middle ground, I really do get how challenging that can be, but it could just be saying like, I don't know, you'll have to ask her, or I don't know, is that what happened? I'm not sure that I saw that, or depending on what the circumstance is, you can not necessarily throw your friend under the bus, but also decide that like lying for you is not necessarily a line that I'm willing to cross,
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think one of the last things that I would just throw out there is that trust in relationships can be rebuilt. And so I want to offer a little bit of hope that just because this is a pattern that maybe you've seen and it concerns you does not mean that the friendship is doomed or that you can't have trust with this person moving forward. Of course, it takes consistent effort and consistent changed behavior. Trust is something that's earned over time. And so if she's lost that over time, it might take some time for her to build that back up. But if she's interested and willing, it can be done. And so I just want to offer a little bit of hope there that, with time, you can kind of build a new history with her that could potentially change the way you're perceiving her and the way that she is embraced within this friend group.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for the question. Great one.
Yes, that was a good one. If you'd like to hear our thoughts on a topic that matters to you, email your question to info@askatherapistpod.com. We'd also like to hear your thoughts on today's topic. What resonated? What didn't? What did we miss? If you have advice for our listener, please share it. You may just hear your feedback on a future episode. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at askatherapist_pod. Emails and DMs are always welcome. Also, if you'd like to connect with me or Kenzie and learn more about the services we offer in our private practices, check the show notes for ways to reach us directly. With that, we're signing off. Thanks for listening. And remember, don't wing it. Just ask a therapist.
That's it for today's episode. We hope it gave you something to reflect on, or maybe even that aha moment.
If so, you know the drill. Rate, review, subscribe, and don't forget to text it to the group chat. Remember, sharing is caring.
If you have a question you want us to tackle, big or small, we want to hear it.
Email us at info@askatherapistpod.com or slide into our DMs on Instagram at askatherapist_pod.
You bring the questions.
We'll bring the insight and probably a metaphor or two.
This is Ask a Therapist.